Hey everyone, I am Kyle Racky, and on today's show we are talking about retainers. I have with me Barry O'Kane, who runs a company out of Scotland called Endzone Software, and he's been in the web development business since 1999. He was a partner in another agency for 12 years before exiting that and starting his own agency that he's been doing now for the last 3 years. So what Endzone Software does is they're really development specialists. So they help out creative agencies to be able to handle their technical issues and their support challenges. And they also like working with impact-driven organizations, charities, and so forth. So very happy to have Barry O'Kane on the show today. Welcome to the Biz Chat, Barry.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Appreciate being here.
Happy to have you. So I always love the topic of retainers because I think they're probably one of the most difficult contracts to sell a client on, especially with development. A lot of clients kind of come in and they just want, like, they think of a website or an app as being a one-time project, a one-time fee. And so when you tell them, oh no, pay us every month to help you out, there's always sort of some pushback. So maybe just, let's talk through a little bit of what you're doing with your company. How do you guys sell clients on retainers?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start. And it's always the question people ask first, like, how do you sell retainers? And actually, my answer to that question is, let's take a step further back. So first of all, I think it's really important to go through the process of why retainers, right? To really understand yourself and really be able to visualize that, and not just to be able to understand, okay, hey, we do a retainer because we want to have stability within the business. We want to get out of the firefighting mode of needing to win projects, or because we are looking to build an asset within the business and the contracts and the 12. So I think those things are really fundamentally important, and for us, and the sort of me reasons I want retainers. And we can dig into some of those reasons in a little while if you think that would be useful.
Well, I mean, I think everybody wants retainers because obviously recurring revenue is great. Not having to chase after clients, like you said, firefighting mode. Recurring revenue is just beautiful from a business standpoint. I think it's just really like, how do you convince a client to agree to that 6-month or 12-month contract?
Yeah. And I think that comes down to the second part of the why retainers. Like, almost as a professional, we're almost behoven, I think, to provide this kind of value. So if I'm providing you with a website, whether that's purely the design and creative, or if I'm providing you with some sort of project, with some sort of output of the work that I'm doing, if I just give that to you and then run away and hide, I'm like undervaluing. I'm not delivering the value that I should be giving to you. And most of us are running agencies, and particularly I find in the creative type of people, your motivation for what you do and why you do what you do is because you want to use your skills, and you want to have that value, and there's something that's sort of driving you to do that kind of business, to develop that kind of skill set. So I think if you can approach that conversation with the fundamental belief, and I think this is absolutely true, that retainers are more valuable to the client. So if you start with that sort of premise or that sort of assumption, and then the conversation is very different. Rather than me trying to sell you on something, I am absolutely convinced that this is the more valuable to you, not just to me, but to you. So then we can start to look at, well, how is it more valuable and why is it more valuable? And rather than me trying to convince you, we can dig into the specific reasons why. Right. Does that make sense? That sort of boxes the conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. So when you're going through, I mean, I guess typically with clients, what the value do they see in the retainer? Is it quicker access to support, fixes, additions to their website, let's say? What are some of the kind of the reasons that you typically go through?
Yeah. So some of those reasons. So that's the quicker access to the team, turnaround for things, guaranteed, blah, blah, blah. Those are like the how you do it. The actual outcome for the client might be, well, depending on what type of services you provide, but you might be on several different levels. But I think last year at some point, Brennan Dunn wrote an excellent blog post that I thought summarized this quite well. He talked about insurance and like the level of insurance. So we're providing like a safety net. You can call me if something goes wrong. So actually the value there isn't necessarily that you can call me, but in the same way as an insurance is valuable. If something goes wrong, you've got a safety net that can help you. So that's the value to you.
Yeah.
Or we might be doing something that's more on the proactive side, where we're sort of providing a more business growth service to you. So that might be something on the marketing side or on the creative side.
Right, and I think that would be probably an easier sell too, to be able to say, we're going to work like, let's say it's a charity and they have a donate button. We're going to work every month to try to get you more donors and optimize your conversion rate so people donate more. I mean, if they can see those improvements every month, that's adding value, right?
Yeah, exactly. And moving that conversation from, hey, I'm trying to sell you this thing, but hey, I'm trying to help you with this business problem you have. And not actually, moving the wrong conversation is the wrong way, but actually genuinely needing, first of all, to get that information. I find, to go back to your first question, is how do you sell retainers? I always think that the best way to answer that is to ask questions. Like, you really want to understand and dig into the problems that they're experiencing. I would caveat that to say that there are situations, maybe if you're further down the process, or somebody's giving like a sort of, asking for a proposal or a bid process, and they're so far down the process that asking them to step back and look at their why is a tough challenge. So there are points where in the sort of agency process where that becomes a difficult thing. But if you can sort of really understand the problems and the issues that they're experiencing, and then talk about how you can solve those and how it's important to solve those. I can't just monitor your site and, let's pick another little specific example, finding broken links on your site. Very small, very minor thing, but that might be part of an ongoing support service. If we did that this month, then great. But what happens if in 2 months somebody is linking to your site with a great rave review, but it's linking to a broken page? Then you've maybe potentially lost some leads, or the client has potentially lost some leads or lost some new business. So then you need to talk about, okay, well, the value you need that thing ongoing. Otherwise, you're losing potentially losing X business, and so on.
Yeah.
And I know that's a very simplistic little example, but for me, I think that's the type of conversation that you need to have.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And I like the idea of the insurance policy. So it's kind of like risk aversion. So let's say you've got the retainer in place, the client is paying it. We all know, I mean, especially myself running a SaaS business, the nature of a recurring revenue and subscription type of businesses is that gradually over time people move away from you, and churn and cancellation is sort of the biggest problem that any kind of recurring revenue business faces. And so if you're an agency running a business that relies mostly on retainers, then you're almost in the subscription business game. And a big challenge is, how do you avoid clients getting to the end of their 6-month or 12-month retainer and going, you know what, I don't really need you guys anymore. See you later.
Totally.
How do you optimize your retainer?
So that's a really excellent question as well. And I guess it depends. The short answer is regular communication but to just say that is like, it doesn't provide enough information. But the other thing to think about is demonstrating that value on an ongoing basis. So, for example, you might simply be doing a monitoring service, or providing images for marketing campaign or whatever. And you might have this happens quite often, you have quite a good relationship with somebody in the team, on the client, somebody lower down in the chain, and they're providing and you're helping them. But if you can put that little extra bit of effort and provide what might be like a CEO-ready report, or a report that they can then use to make them look good to their management, because the ideal situation you want is, and it's not just a time-based thing. So say in your client, there's a new CTO or a new CFO, or somebody comes in and they're doing that usual thing. They come in, they want to make an impact. So they start looking through and they say, hey, what's this big monthly fee that's coming out? What are we getting for that? What you want to do is have the team, the people you're working directly with, have the perfect answer to that. Hey, this is last month's report. These guys did X, Y, Z. They're really fundamentally important to my job. And then the CFO will go, awesome, that's wonderful. Move on to the next line item.
Yeah.
So that's how to think about it. If you need to constantly justify is the wrong word, but to constantly demonstrate and not just provide the value, but constantly demonstrate that value. And for me, that comes down to that communication, whether it's day-to-day task or week-to-week task communication, but then also summarizing that in the higher level reports, for example, in a report.
Yeah, I think reports can be undervalued by agencies, but they're in a way overvalued by clients. And I'm speaking as someone who has hired agencies as well as run in an agency. When you run, or let's say me as a client hiring, say, a PPC agency, just getting on the first of the month or as close to it as possible, that monthly report that says, like, here's what we did, here's what's working, here's what wasn't working, here's what we changed, it makes me, even if I was the one who hired them, let alone selling it to my boss, it makes me feel better about paying that monthly fee, because I'm like, okay, if you hear crickets every month, you're just like, even if a lot of work's being done, you don't know it, right?
Yeah.
So important.
100%. And it's more than that important as well, is if it's opportunities for you to, I have this framework for support retainers where, or ongoing retainers, where you think about splitting into three areas, so reactive, maintenance, and proactive. And reactive is the knee-jerk reaction, hey, they need help, I need to respond right now. And as a provider of a retainer or the ongoing service, you want to try and reduce that or manage that in a way, and we can talk a little bit about that. And the way you reduce that and manage that is by setting up the maintenance side, so that's schedulable or automated work that you can do to manage that, and things like documentation and etc. But really, the power of doing all of that is to move to this proactive space, where you can go to whether that's either upselling, as in genuinely upselling and bringing in new income for the agency, or simply constantly demonstrating that value, and so that the person who works with you absolutely loves you because you make them look good.
Yeah.
And that, taking back to the report thing there, the report is something that they can go to their team and their manager and say, hey, I did this thing because these guys,
right.
That shine.
It reminds me a lot, and I've been thinking about this a lot. It's kind of the difference between customer support and customer success. Like, both are extremely important. Support is reactive. It's somebody going, hey, something's broken, I need you to fix it. Success is kind of a lot broader and but also a lot deeper than that, where it's actually monitoring what they're doing, the relationship between them and your company, and going, are we bringing them value, measurable, successful value? And, some of that's helping, like, limiting the likelihood that they'll churn or cancel. And also, like you said, upselling. Hey, you're not taking advantage of this service or this feature or whatever, I think that's great. I mean, what do you think is the biggest challenge to being proactive? Because everybody can be reactive. Like, if you have an account manager on your team, it's obviously easy for him or her to, like, check their email and go, oh, clients yelling, I got to call them up. But how do you kind of help one of your own employees, maybe you're not the one managing the account, go, here's what you need to be doing every day or every week to monitor, and things to look for to be proactive on?
Yeah. So there's a two-step process there. The biggest problem is capacity, or having that space to improve that. And if you're being very reactive, in fact, if you're being very reactive and you're still doing projects, you might see the reactive support hurting your projects, right? Your team might be frustrated because they have to react to that email instead of working on the project. So by working out how to reduce that reactive stuff, and then using that space that you've created, I don't like physical and time space, to actually say, okay, and then systemizing an approach. So a good example of this sort of system is growth-driven design, the HubSpot and Luke Summerfield's growth-driven design stuff.
Okay.
I highly recommend people look at that if they're interested in this kind of approach, because it's quite a good system around this idea of taking support from beyond, or taking retainers or an ongoing engagement from beyond the just reactive support, but providing genuine value. So to sort of step back through that process, the first thing I think is to identify and understand where you're being reactive, where your time and your capacity, your team's time and your capacity is being sucked up and lost in things that you can't schedule and so on. That's often a big issue in agencies that I see. And work out, maybe over time, how to reduce that and get that in control, so that your team doesn't feel like they're in this constant panic mode.
Yeah.
And then whether that's and then using that vehicle, sort of the confidence of the little gains you get there over time, to build into this sort of momentum and movement towards a structured support process, proactive support process. And you might, to steal something again from growth-driven design, you might say, okay, for this month we're going to look at all of our clients and identify ways that we can help with conversion rates depending on the skill set you're working on. Mm-hmm. So let's literally go through all our clients and look at a couple of things that could help improve their conversion rates, and therefore tie that back to our services. And maybe you have a template of the kind of document or feedback or phone call depending on the setup, how you feedback. And then maybe next month or next quarter you have a different focus where you think about, well, we're continuing to reduce our reactive and get in control of our ongoing support. Now let's look at the focus for this month's proactive support is maybe you might make traffic or reducing errors, or we have this new copywriting service and we want to look at how copywriting issues on the site, or whatever the agency's services are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's and I think so few agencies do this. I don't really have data to back that up, but like that's just throughout time and experience. That's kind of, I hardly see agencies do that. And honestly, we didn't really do that when I ran an agency, but we also turned over our clients a lot. Like a client, they weren't on a retainer, so they would come to us if they needed something and we would charge them for it, but we never had this sort of regular recurring revenue. I think people need to realize, like, it's so hard to win, like to sell a new client is so much more time and energy than just keeping one you already have.
Yeah,
that's so important. Now, I love this post that you sent. So people listening to this should check out Endzonesoftware.com, and it's how to structure and optimize support retainers that don't drive your agency mad is the URL and the headline. We'll also post a link to this in the show notes. But you go over this stuff. And I like that you've got examples in there of maintenance, reactive, and proactive support. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the examples I often use are from the development side, but I think the principles apply in any, it's the principles rather than the specific examples. But I'll try and pick examples that aren't in the article. So reactive support might be, something's broken. That's the canonical example of a reactive support. So if you are getting, hey, this page is broken, then that needs fixed right now. Okay, so that probably means taking somebody off a current project, depending on how your SLA works, to fix that issue right now. And for me, it's really fundamental, I think, to then start to look at when things happen, to look at how you move that back to maintenance, so that it doesn't come back and happen again. And the obvious thing there is about looking at quality or monitoring, or something that lets you find out about these issues ahead of the client getting on the phone and being in a panic. But another good example of reactive support that I think is maybe more insidious is, so we do a lot of CMS implementations in support of the CMS, and you might get a client that's saying, hey, I need to put this offer live today at 3:00, but I can't get the image uploaded, or I can't do this. How do I do this on the site? How do I update this information? And they have a time limit, and that bumps it into reactive. You need to help them, or you're going to make them unhappy, and they are going to disappear and do that churn thing. And for me, it's very easy or in my experience, what I see is very easy to just respond and fix that issue. So, hey, let me just upload that image for you. Let me just help you out. And then they go away feeling good. But actually, all you're doing is perpetuating the problem. So all you're doing is basically training them that when they get stuck with an image upload, to come to you. And if that's the type of issue, and what you want to do is flip that around and say, maybe you have a development or a task list somewhere, so that you can maybe fix that issue this time. But going on a list that your team genuinely is going to tackle when it's in the schedule and there's a process to tackle this, is to look at why that client was stuck on that issue. So say it's as simple as uploading an image. Maybe in WordPress or in Umbraco or the CMS, maybe there's a simple thing that we can help them, or a document or a video or some way that can help them actually be in control of that themselves. Right. Another example that's in a different industry that I've seen recently is where at 4 o'clock on a Friday, on a almost regular basis, the client comes up and says, "Hey, I need this thing. I need this image for the Facebook campaign I'm running this weekend." And you're like, "Yeah, that's great. I was literally about to start winding down for the weekend." So instead of just reacting or sort of, saying, "Oh, this is annoying," and reacting, let's actually look at how and sort of do a sort of root cause analysis. Let's dig into the client and understand why the client is coming to us at 4 o'clock. It's entirely possible that they have their campaigns booked out for 6 months in advance, but the person who's coming down to implement it is sitting down at 4 o'clock and and typing and starting, "Oh, I need that image. I can hit up the design guy to get that for me," or girl.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe what you want to do is flip that around and say, "Okay, well, you guys are doing this. Let's have a call every Tuesday morning and talk about this weekend's campaign." And now you've brought it into maintenance, it's in your schedule, you're in control, there's enough time, and you're helping the client by providing them with the assets they need for their weekend campaign.
Yeah, I love those examples. It's really about problem solving and getting to the root of the problem as opposed to just diagnosing, kind of like a doctor just diagnosing symptoms versus treating the actual cause. It's so good to do that and so smart. As we all know, clients can be demanding and they can have unreasonable expectations. You made great examples of, calling at 4 o'clock or even emailing on the weekend and wanting you to get back to them on Sunday at, or Saturday at 10 p.m. or whatever. Just because they're working, they assume you need to be. How do you manage expectations and scope when it comes to a retainer as far as going, okay, you're paying us every month, but this doesn't mean this is like your 1-800, hotline to call us any time of day, right?
Yeah, 100%. That's actually, I think, the biggest challenge that I've seen in agencies with retainers or with any type of ongoing arrangement is managing those expectations. And whether that's managing those expectations around what you're talking about, hey, you can call me whenever, which might be something that you're doing, but it needs to be explicit. And unfortunately, once you've got that type of arrangement or agreement with or sort of implicit understanding with the client, once you're in that position, basically, it's hard to move from it.
Yeah,
it's hard to make that change and retrain. And I actually firmly believe that the only way to do that is to do something to the client looks very radical and say, "Hey, we've completely revamped our services." Send them a newly nice branded service thing and say, that service no longer exists. Let me let me tell you about this great new service we have. Right. So that's the change factor. But actually, boxing or controlling or putting limits around or being really clear on the service you provide is, I think, fundamental to the success of a retainer. Not just so that you can control your own, like that capacity planning thing and that responsive thing, but also so that you can demonstrate the value. We talked before about the maybe monthly reports or whatever. You want to be able to tie that, and you mentioned measuring. You want to be able to tie that result you're giving back to the original agreement and back it up with measurements, whether that's actual numbers or sort of less concrete things. But you want to be able to tie it all together, and you can only really do that if you're very clear up front.
Yeah.
So that means being clear on the services. And I think a lot of agencies make, in my opinion, what's a mistake. They say, "Hey, we do support." And it's this very generic catch-all, "We'll look after your service, we'll do this thing." And I think it's much better to have more of a menu of what I call value-add services. So let's think about specifically what the client needs and how we can provide it. And then and that might be a whole list, and some of which you go, actually, we don't want to, or we can't provide that. And then you might say, let's go through some examples to make that more concrete. So providing support for a website. So you might be providing copywriting. You might be providing technical support as a site up or down. You might be providing the help me with my CMS. You might be providing the hosting. There's this huge sort of menu of things. And that's not before you even get to some of the extra values, like if you provide SEO or extra design or marketing or PPC or all these other things.
Right.
So I think it's sort of, you end up with a bit of a menu, and you can kind of say, okay, you want to get to the point where you have a version of that you can sell to the client, saying, here, tick boxes 1, 2, 3. This, by the way, as an aside, is also moving away from selling them by the hours. I'm not a big fan of hours.
I love that point in your article in the side note. I thought that was really good, and it's probably worth like meandering from the main topic to talk about that. Is the retainer isn't you're buying 10 hours, you're buying 20 hours, you're buying 5 hours. How are they pricing it?
Yeah, so a lot of agencies do price it on hours, but let's talk a little bit about the problems of that, just to make it really explicit. So for me, one of the more insidious problems is that I like analogies. So to use the analogy, if you run a marathon and I ask you how many steps does it take to run the marathon, right? That's what I hear when people are saying how many hours is it. It's like it's connected, but it's completely irrelevant to really the running the marathon, right?
Right.
Or to the end result, to the person who's so I think that's the most sort of fundamental thing is you're kind of measuring something that isn't directly related to the value that the client gets.
Yeah.
It's indirectly related.
How did I say it? I liken hourly based pricing to punishing yourself for being more efficient.
Yes, that's a good example. Yeah, good way to say it.
The better you get at your job, the less time it takes and the less money you make. That's not right.
Yeah. Do you know the story? There's several versions of it, but the version I like is about a plumber. So I have a little leak in my pipe. I call the plumber. The plumber comes around, takes 5 seconds to look at it and turns one little screw and fixes the leak and then says, that'll be $200, please. And I go, hey, $200 to turn one screw? That's craziness. And he says, no, it's 1 cent to turn the screw and $199.99 to know which screw to turn.
Yeah.
And the 10 years that it took me to learn this skill to be able to solve your problem in 5 seconds.
Right. That's a good one. Yeah. And I think that when the conversation, I mean, there's so much stuff here, but like, I'm going to try to stay on point. One of the things I think is that the people selling the projects aren't always the ones implementing them, especially if you've got somebody who's, say, like a head of business development or let's just say a sales guy at the agency. They want to bring the project in and sell it, and they want to close it. So I find that it's difficult to sort of communicate that to the people doing the sales in your organization, is like trying to get them to actually manage client expectations up front, because they actually would be happy to say to the client, hey, sky's the limit, just sign on the dotted line because I want to close this. And it's a lot harder to close that deal if you go, okay, sign this, but this isn't included. If you come to us at this time, we can't handle it. Like, that makes the deal harder to close. And I think really that's a big issue. But then also, the client's going like, how much time is that? And they're so focused on how long things take as opposed to what is the end result.
Yes. Yeah, and the symptoms of that are things like them coming back to say, hey, last time this thing took you an hour and this time it takes you 5 hours. And actually, from their point of view, that seems like the same thing, but in terms of implementation, it's worlds apart. So if you're getting into that kind of conversation, or the risk of getting into that kind of relationship with the client, that's completely the wrong topic instead of the value that you're providing. And the client should be thinking about, hey, we just saved XYZ, or we just made XYZ, leads or business or whatever as a result of that service.
But on the other side of the coin, I guess the challenge with selling deliverables and not putting any hourly rate on them is if you go, okay, SEOs included, general fixes, monitoring, let's just say, and then the client goes, okay, I want you to add a new contact form, or I want you to add like a new mapping feature. I want to redesign how this page looks. You've got it. There's a lot of pushback. If you're selling hours, then you can just like, yeah, sure, it's 10 hours, I'll do it. If it's like, well, you didn't check off that box, and feature requests aren't included, so there's just a lot of maintaining that, right?
Yeah, and that is a challenge. And I think for me, a lot of that comes down to building the real trust relationship with the client. Right, and so that you can have that regular communication, and it comes back to communication. Everything, I think, in every human relationship, whether it's in business or not, comes back to good, clear communication. So if you're my client, and I'm able to sit down and you come to me saying, "Hey, I need this new, a new variation of this contact form, or I need a new design for this thing," and I'm able to say, "Well, in our services, we have these things, and this extra thing you've asked me for is awesome, but it doesn't fit within these boxes. But let's talk about how and why you want that." And this is the part I enjoy about those conversations. Like, why do you want this extra thing? And how can we help you get to the goal you want to with, say, you're coming, I need a new contact form. This happens all the time. I need a new contact form because I need people who are in this specific situation with this data coming and asking this specific question. And you can kind of step back and say, okay, well, why are you assuming people are in this position? Let's try just putting some tracking up, and seeing, or and tracking both in terms of the website and tracking in terms of the data, the information you're already getting from your contact form, and see if that's actually needed. So you're kind of able to move the conversation to talking about their value, rather than saying, oh, by the way, I need to charge you another 10 hours.
Yeah, and I think that's how you become a more trusted advisor and a partner to the client, because you're not now an order taker. Client said they want a contact form, implement a contact form. You're actually like a trusted expert. Go figure. You're the one going, why do you want a contact form? That's actually kind of a stupid reason to want one. Like, you shouldn't do that. And I think if you prove that over time, they'll be more likely to listen to you and take your advice.
Yeah, and you need to do that across the board. So to take it back to the question about managing expectations around your retainers, you need to do that kind of communication across the board if you want to move into that sort of level of the relationship. You also need to be able to implement things and be good at that, but you need to constantly measure or be able to demonstrate everything you implement against that value that you provide. When, for example, going back to this menu of options, so instead of saying, hey, we'll support your website and it'll be X hours, and then anything over X hours is, and you have this, and then you end up in this complicated, it seems simple on the outside, but you end up in this complicated situation very quickly. Never mind the capacity planning. But instead, let's look at what we can do. So we can provide XYZ as this monitoring support service. So we'll monitor your sites, we'll check for these things, we'll do the upgrades, and that will help you solve these problems. Your security risks will go down. Your uptime, we'll be able to demonstrate uptime. If there's any issues, we'll know about them quickly and be able to work out with you how we respond. So you're not saying we just do these things, but here's what you get, or here's why this is a valuable service.
Right. It's like feature benefit.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Or the sort of thinking about it from the productized space, And I think this is often a challenge for agencies who are purely in the services, and using some of those product thinking or software thinking you mentioned before, churn. I think some of those concepts are really valuable, and the terminology and the way people describe them to think about with retainers. And even if retainers aren't a big part of your business, then they can be a really powerful way to just keep in touch with your clients, right? Yeah. If you do it right.
Yeah. Great tips. Barry, thanks so much for being on the show, sharing your advice with us.
No problem. You're very welcome.
If people want to contact you, ask any additional questions, where should they go?
So I'm pulling together all the stuff we write, and a little some information about retainers at Endzone Software /retainer. That's Endzone as in touchdown, software /retainer. And I'll put a bunch of stuff there. We've got a whole bunch of articles, the one you mentioned, and a little sort of cheat sheet, I guess, of trying to guide people through what I think is important when thinking about these things.
That's great stuff. Thank you so much again, and we'll talk to you later.